And Pakistan's remarks about Jammu and Kashmir at the United Nations Human Rights Council were no more than an offensive rhetoric, false allegations and concocted charges, is what India said.
Mr. President, India holds the credentials of being the world's largest democracy. Our constitution guarantees fundamental rights to all our citizens without distinction. Our independent judiciary, free media, vibrant civil society provides an effective framework for protection of human rights. My government is taking affirmative actions by adopting progressive policies to promote socio-economic equality and justice. As a result of recent legislative measures, these progressive policies will now be fully applicable to our citizens in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. These will end gender discrimination, better protect juvenile rights, and make applicable rights to education, information and work. The decisions were taken by our Parliament after a fully televised debate and enjoys widespread support. These were sovereign decisions, entirely internal to India. No country can accept interference in its internal affairs, certainly not India. Despite challenging circumstances, Jammu and Kashmir civil administration is ensuring basic services, essential supplies, mobility and connectivity. Democratic processes have been initiated, restrictions are being eased continuously, temporary preventive measures were needed to ensure security in the face of credible threats of cross-border terrorism. The world, in particular India, has suffered greatly on account of state-sponsored terrorism. It is time to collectively take decisive and firm action against terror groups who threaten fundamental right to life. We must speak out. Silence alone emboldens terrorists and their supporters. Mr. President, one delegation here has given a running commentary with offensive rhetoric of false allegations and concocted charges against my country. The world is aware that this fabricated narrative comes from the epicentre of global terrorism, where ringleaders are sheltered for years. This country conducts cross-border terrorism as a form of alternate diplomacy. National Register for Civil Rights is a statutory, transparent, non-discriminatory legal process mandated and monitored by the Supreme Court of India. Its implementation will comply with Indian laws. As a responsible member of the international community, India firmly believes in a constructive approach to promote and protect human rights. My full statement will be on the HRC internet. I thank you all.
Well, earlier Pakistan demanded that the United Nations Human Rights Council set up a commission to inquire into what it termed as gross violations of human rights in Jammu and Kashmir since the revocation of the special status granted to the region.
This is the real story of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and its people under subjugation that India is desperate to hide from the world. India's unilateral actions of 5th August 2019 of altering the status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir, recognized as a disputed territory by the UN Security Council, are illegal under international law.
Well, Pakistan's foreign minister, who you saw there, perhaps in a Freudian slip, referred to our state of Jammu and Kashmir as the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is entirely our position, and not Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which is Pakistan's position. He said this in a soundbite to the media.
India is trying to give an impression to the world that life has returned to normalcy. If the life has returned to normalcy, then I say, why don't they allow you, the international media, why don't they allow international organizations, the NGOs, civil society organizations to go into the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir and see for themselves what the reality is?
All right, so where does India presently stand as far as the international support that Delhi has enjoyed in many quarters over the last several weeks? And this needs to be put into some sort of context. On the one hand, many governments have said, by and large, the decision on Article 370 is India's decision, though several countries around the world, whether it's the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or other countries, have said that the human rights situation on the ground is a matter of concern. So it needs to be looked at from that standpoint. But going into the United Nations General Assembly session in a short while from now. What sort of support does India enjoy? Joining us, Alyssa Ayres, the Senior Fellow for India, Pakistan and South Asia at the Council for Foreign Relations, joining us from Washington, D.C. Lalita Kumara Mangalam of the BJP, my former colleague Maya Meechandani, journalist and columnist. Brahma Chilani, the Strategic Affairs expert, and the former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shashank, joins us as well. Mr. Shashank, let me come to you first. Broadly speaking, sir, India's arguments on Kashmir today at the United Nations Human Rights Commission have been similar to what we've said in the past. But in the context of it now being more than a month since the clampdown in Kashmir, is India under serious threat of losing the broad support which we've had, at least when it came to a part of the decision that applied to 370 being an internal decision?
Well, when Pakistan went to the Security Council with the support of China, they had taken the issue with regard to their position that it's a disputed territory, and they have handed over part of that region to China. They have allowed Chinese troops to come inside that area to look after them, and somehow Pakistan got the feeling that they had the support of the UK traditionally and also now the support of USA, because they would be helping USA to get their troops out of Afghanistan, and they would somehow cut their losses and hand over the country to Taliban and Pakistan's other friends. Now this is a different kind of a scenario now. Pakistan is trying to build on the narrative that there are human rights violations in India, in Jammu and Kashmir particularly, and therefore they are quite willing to accept that Jammu and Kashmir is a state of India, but human rights violations are taking place. So this is in order to get more support from members of the United Nations, where many of them have their own human rights record, which is subject to great scrutiny, and they come up from time to time. But somehow here they are able to get together in order to talk well of the human rights in India. I think India has to give a very befitting, very clear-cut reply, and I am sure that whatever Secretary East Vijayalata Thakur had said, I think that's really great, should be taken on record, and I think that is the only proper thing for us to do. In General Assembly, we will have to see. Okay. General Assembly is a completely different area. Once again, we will have to see on the basis of political issues and the kind of situation which arises at that time.
I just want to bring Maya in over here. Maya, despite what Pakistan says, is there still a broad understanding among important international nations that Pakistan's position as far as terrorism is concerned is entirely untenable, and that when India says that Pakistan is the epicenter of terrorism and is in no position to preach to us, that argument continues to be held very close to the hearts of important countries?
Yeah, I think, Vishnu, actually the international community is, trained at good diplomacy, and they're aware that the dialogue or the commentary on Kashmir is really split into two strains. One is the move on Article 370, the internal political dynamic, the issues with Pakistan and Pakistan's support to cross-border terrorism. The other, and I think that's becoming the center of the international community's focus now, I think we're 37 or 38 days into this decision, is the restrictions, is the communications lockdown, is the detention of mainstream political leaders. Because what's really happening, or what's likely to happen in this, is that without a political voice, do people have the right to react to what has happened to them? If they have a reaction, does the public have the right to hear it? And how does that message come out? Because I think what's happening as far as the world community is concerned is that the messaging is coming from Pakistan, the messaging is coming from India, but for the people who are caught in the midst of this conflict, nobody knows what they think or feel right now.
Yeah. Alyssa, if we look at international reactions on the human rights situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and it needs to be said that what many in the international media are saying is not being reported over here at all. We won't get into that argument for the moment, but if you look at, say, the US State Department, we continue to be very concerned by reports of detentions. The European Union High Representative reiterated a call to avoid an escalation of tensions, stressed the importance of steps to restore rights and freedoms. Canada, which has said Human rights, very important. Infringements on civil rights, reports of detentions in Kashmir is a matter of concern for them. The UK Foreign Secretary had earlier said the issue of human rights is not just a bilateral issue for India or Pakistan or a domestic issue, it's an international one. Even the French president has sort of said something along these lines. Where does the international community now see India and its position on Kashmir?
Thanks, Vishnu. Obviously, it's hard to answer that specific question. It is not as if the international community has a unified voice on this question, but I do think that your observation is absolutely right, that you're seeing more countries and more independent politicians in the United States. We're now seeing more U.S. members of Congress make statements that appeal to the government of India to release the mainstream politicians from the house arrest or the detention that they've been under now for more than a month, and to really fully lift this communications blockade so people can communicate with their loved ones. I mean, what you're really seeing is concern and a focus on the question of allowing the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir to enjoy all the rights that they enjoy as citizens of India. That's the kind of focus and attention that I think this issue has now shifted to.
Brahma Chelari, going forward, and all the rhetoric that we've seen from Pakistan, Imran Khan some time back warning of the potential dangers of a nuclear war, India telling Pakistan you need to scale down this rhetoric, and then you see a very aggressive Pakistani foreign minister over there. How is it absolutely critical for Pakistan, Islamabad, to tone down the rhetoric if there is any hope for eventual talks between India and Pakistan?
Well, the talks certainly don't look imminent at all. But look at the paradox. Pakistan is seeking to spotlight the human rights of 7 million people in the Kashmir Valley in India, while violating the rights of 220 million Pakistanis, including locking up the main opposition leaders. In Balochistan, persons abducted by security forces usually end up dead, with their bodies dumped by the roadside. Pakistan wants genuine democracy in India's J&K, but not at home. Yeah. The same is true of communist China. In fact, this strategic nexus between Pakistan and China is an axis between two human rights violating states. So given the nexus between China and Pakistan, India has to rebut and counter the allegations that are being made. Last month, it was the machinations of China in the Security Council, and this month, India is facing the machinations of Pakistan in the Human Rights Council in Geneva.
Okay. Lalita Kumara Mangalam, how would you respond to those who say that irrespective at this juncture of what some countries may think or not think, the fact that we have an incredibly popular government, a very strong government here in Delhi, what other countries really think doesn't matter. We have done what we had to do in Jammu and Kashmir. Some people would argue that way, and therefore what foreign opinion is in a situation like this politically, where the Modi government is so strong, what the other countries think doesn't really matter.
Vishnu, I don't think anybody in India is going to put it quite the way you just did, because this is not how one should talk in the international media or even at international forums. But the fact also is that India has no intentions of matching the sort of ratcheted up, almost desperate, sort of talk that's coming out of Pakistan. Pakistan has got an enormous amount to lose, and everybody knows that it is the epicenter of terrorism, and this is what India has been repeatedly saying. Now, everybody also knows that India conducts extremely successfully every 5 years elections throughout the country, except for a very long time. We haven't really had total democracy in democratic processes being in place in Kashmir, especially with regard to the grassroots panchayats, etc. Now, the fact is that beyond a certain point, every country, let me put it a different way. Every country up to an extent who is questioning India has got themselves very often, more often than not, very questionable record on what you call human rights. Now, in international diplomacy, many countries have been, as we've already seen in the Security Council, everybody supported India despite China's overt and very open support of Pakistan. Now, at the UNHRC, I think Vijay Thakur has given an extremely strong, though level-headed reply. India has no intentions of trying to match the overheated rhetoric of Pakistan. We don't need to. And we have made it very clear that the democratic process will be restored in full in Kashmir, but it will take some time. We've had too much happening in Kashmir where Pakistan has interfered, I mean, ruthlessly, remorselessly, with no respect for human rights of anybody in Jammu and Kashmir. It's very hypocritical, but Pakistan has been very hypocritical for many years with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. Now, it's not that the Indian government doesn't, care at all about what the international community is saying, but it's also equally clear that we have to put our own interests and the interests of really full, a sort of full return to democracy in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, it's not as if everybody in Jammu and Kashmir either is dissatisfied with what has happened. Yes, of course, there's a section that's a bit unhappy, and the government of India is very clear about this. We have said
Kumaramangalam, I take the points that you are mentioning. I'll come back to you when I can in just a minute. I want to go across to my other panelists as well. So, you had a point, Maya.
Yeah, I just want to say, Vishnu, I mean, the thing is that every year at the United Nations General Assembly, India walks into the hall with a sense of moral authority, with a sense of global stature. We're on the offensive, really, when we go into these international fora. I think what we're seeing and what we've been seeing for the last month, we saw the foreign minister's visit to Europe and his outreach to European nations. We saw that video that the Indian ambassador to the US had made last week. We're seeing Vijay Thakur Singh's extremely eloquent statement at the UNHRC. But all these really are in response to allegations against India.
Hold your thought over there. India replying now at the UNHRC.
To encourage violence both inside Jammu and Kashmir and in third countries, in order to paint a picture of genocide, which even they know is far from reality. Pakistan has today pretended to speak as a voice of global community on human rights, but the world cannot be fooled. Pakistan's gory record speaks for itself. This rhetoric will not distract international attention from Pakistan's persecution and elimination of religious and ethnic minorities, be it Christians, Sikhs, Shias, Ahmadiyyas and Hindus. This is the reason that Pakistan no longer publishes official statistics about its minorities as India does. Blatant abuse of blasphemy laws in Pakistan to persecute minorities is well documented. Asia Bibi, the Christian woman, was incarcerated for years. So was Abdul Shakur, the 82-year-old Ahmadiyya, under Anti-Terrorism Act for selling books. The recent case of abduction, forced conversion and marriage of a minor Sikh girl, Jagjit Kaur, exemplifies the state of women, especially from the minority communities in Pakistan. And today, in this council, Pakistan has the audacity to tell others about human rights that it so egregiously violates again and again. Mr. President, as regards OIC, it has no locus standi to comment on the internal affairs of India. Jammu and Kashmir has been, is and shall continue to be an integral part of India. Pakistan's nefarious designs will never succeed because the people of Jammu and Kashmir are united in their determination to preserve our territorial integrity along with our core values of democracy, tolerance and unity and diversity. Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh will continue to progress and prosper along with the rest of India. It defies credibility that Pakistan, which is the epicenter of global terrorism, is claiming to speak on behalf of unnamed other countries on the issue of human rights. It forgets that terrorism is a worst form of human rights abuse. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole au Venezuela.
All right, a statement from the Indian diplomat over there at the United Nations. This was, I believe, a right to rebuttal. There's been a back and forth between Indian and Pakistani diplomats over there. Alyssa, I found that statement interesting because unlike the previous statement by our Secretary East, where she didn't name Pakistan, here Pakistan was named. And again, the focus was on blasphemy laws in Pakistan, Pak elimination of minorities, the gaudy record of Pakistan, etc., etc. But perhaps a more direct statement or a direct counterattack on Pakistan at this forum.
Well, that's certainly what we just heard. I mean, my own response to having heard that is that, in fact, we all know the great problems that Pakistan has had. It has not managed diversity very well in its country, to say the least. And that's why I don't think it's helpful for India to get into a comparative a comparison of its record against Pakistan, because India has always been so much better on the question of managing diversity in a huge and unruly and frankly quite inspirational democracy. So what you see happening now internationally is people asking questions about the strength of India's ability to manage its diversity. That is why you are hearing people call for the detained politicians to be released and for the communications blockade to be eased, so India can continue to fulfill its highest ideals that are enshrined in the Constitution and affording rights to all of its citizens.
Brahma Chilani, would you like to come in on this, that what are we comparing ourselves with? The statement we just heard is a direct counter, in a sense, to Pakistan. If they accuse us of human rights abuses, we are accusing them of a gaudy record. If they accuse us of a clampdown, we accuse them of an elimination of minorities. If they say something against us, we hit them on blasphemy laws. Is Pakistan our standard? Shouldn't we in international fora be aspiring to something larger?
I think as far as the government of India is concerned, they have to respond to China's or Pakistan's allegations, whether the Security Council or the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. But I think in our public discourse in India, we need to reduce the salience of, for example, what's happening today and will happen in the coming days in the UN Human Rights Council, because the UN Human Rights Council has become increasingly irrelevant. The United States walked out of the council 2 years ago. The council, among its 47 members, has the world's leading human rights abusers, like China and Saudi Arabia. So the council is hardly a forum that we should be focusing on. But I think as far as the government of India is concerned, it has to ensure that Pakistan does not succeed, for example, in calling for a special debate on J&K or in getting a special resolution passed on J&K. So the government's task is clearly cut out. But as far as our public discourse is concerned, we need to focus on our internal challenges. As far as what's happening in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, it'll be a long process. India will have to bear short-term pain to achieve long-term gain in Jammu and Kashmir. This is going to be a long haul for India.
Sure.
And our challenges are largely internal. But we need to also address the international ramifications of the government's move on J&K.
All right. I just want to go back to Ambassador Shashank. Ambassador, would you agree that India preventing a special debate at the United Nations General Assembly, which is coming up, or a special session on Jammu and Kashmir would be the next major imperative of Indian diplomats?
You know, at the higher level, that is Secretary East level, India is putting the record straight, and at the same time keeping the possibility open that Pakistan might by chance change its stand and try to behave like a normal civilized neighboring country. And if that happens, then India would be prepared to go for a direct dialogue if Pakistan can get rid of the terrorists that it is supporting, it is sponsoring. So therefore, that is the thing. But at the technical level, yes, I mean, Indian diplomats are going to go all out, put the mirror in front of the Pakistani delegates to say that what kind of wrong things, falsehoods they are trying to propagate. And as far as other countries are concerned, we know that if we put up something with regard to Pakistan's human rights record, they would be only too happy to talk against Pakistan. Now, since Pakistan has come up with some ideas, so they are trying to say that, all right, I mean, they are becoming great votaries and propagators of human rights, whereas they know that there are many more countries which are much worse. And they are trying to tell India that in any case, India has a very good record and you should try to keep that record even better. So I think what India has to do is to bother about its own constitutional provisions, make sure that yes, we have certain commitments to our people, we continue to move in that direction, and at the same time we have to make sure that not many people get killed because of Pakistani sponsored terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay, Maya, come in. Yeah,
I just, the fact is that we're sitting here and debating what India is doing on the international stage. It's clear that our diplomats are under pressure right now to ensure that India's reputation as a constitutional democracy that looks after the welfare of its citizens is front and center. But it seems to be sort of in defense of its own actions rather than as a given on the international stage today. And I think, the question that one really needs to ask is, if this is about, short-term pain and long-term gain, is there a timeline to it? How short is the short term? Who is actually going through this pain? Is it the people in Jammu and Kashmir? Is it the rest of India? Because, the question is that, is it about the land or is it about the people? Is it about India's position diplomatically? What is this really about now? Because the Indian government has done what it intended to do. It has done what was in the BJP's electoral manifesto. So now what?
Where is the drawdown?
Yeah.
Ms. Kumaramangalam, last word to you on that. When does this all end? It's now been more than 35 days, I believe.
Yes.
When does this all come to an end? When is the clampdown going to be removed?
There are two things. Yeah, there are 2 points that. Yeah, there are 2 points that I'd like to make here. One, the National Security Advisor had just a few days ago, or perhaps yesterday, day before, quite openly said that much of what is going to happen in Kashmir with regard to the lifting of what is called the clampdown by all of you will depend on how Pakistan also reacts. Now, it may well be asked that why do we bother about what Pakistan is, how they are reacting? Well, the fact is that Jammu and Kashmir has been in turmoil for for many decades, principally also because of Pakistan-sponsored terrorism that took its toll on India and Indians, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. The second thing is that there are many reasons for even diplomatic, rhetoric, both economic and political throughout the world. It's not just about China's human rights abuses or what the US may have done in Syria, etc. It's also about economic compulsions. The US needs Pakistan if they need Pakistan's help in order to talk to the Taliban,
which they've now decided not to do.
There too, as you know, recently, because the president of, I'm so sorry. Yes, but they decided not to do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, China needs Pakistan because they want to build the China. I'm sorry for that noise. Somebody turned up at the door. Because they want the China-Pakistan economic corridor to go through, because they want dominance over the Indian Ocean. There are many reasons for this. So in India, let us also not be too naive in thinking that all of the reaction that's coming towards India, a critical reaction with regard to Jammu and Kashmir, is just based on human rights. Human rights could well be, I won't say a cover-up, but one of the sort of reasons or one of the weapons being used in order to, criticize India for many political and economic things that are going on currently in the world.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. For the moment, it appears that the back and forth between India and Pakistan at the United Nations Human Rights Council is over. I think the next venue for this is going to be the United Nations General Assembly. But just a reminder, when this did come up in the United Nations in New York earlier on, India were actually able to at the United Nations Security Council, India were actually able to state that it didn't go the way that Pakistan really wanted that meeting to go. There were no great successes for Pakistan in that meeting.